I made a video months ago where I talked about collectives. I said collectives don't exist. They're concepts. What they describe sort of exists, but they don't exist in terms of the ability to do anything to a collective. The collective forest doesn't exist. It's a concept. You don't cut down a forest. What you do is you cut down individual trees until you've reduced the forest or you've eliminated the forest. But the act of eliminating the forest doesn't really exist. You eliminate individual trees until there is no forest. Similarly, collectives of people, they're concepts, but they don't really exist. Even injustices against people or against individuals, things that are done to individual people. The collectives are used to excuse or to justify somehow acts against individual people. So we may deem a collective to exist and we say this collective is, I don't know, subhuman or is deserving somehow of some terrible treatment. And we use that justification to then invoke individual instances of injustice on individual people. But the collectives themselves don't exist except as an excuse, a justification for these individual instances of injustice. And the point of my video months and months ago was to say we need to stop with the collectivizing of human experience. To say that we can know something about someone from across the field just by viewing a few arbitrary characteristics that they may have, to make judgments about that person, what they must be like, what they must think, and what their experience, what their life experience must necessarily be based on these arbitrary characteristics, which allows us to put them into some sort of a collective to make these judgment calls on them. And we got to stop that. That racism will be with us until we stop putting people into collectives, because it is putting people into those collectives that allows us to somehow justify in our minds the only kind of injustice that actually exists. Injustice against collectives does not exist. Injustice against individual people is what exists. And we use the collective. It's been thought that these collectives are ways of categorizing people so that we can then enumerate the injustice. But not all people of any given collective share equally in even the injustice, even if the injustice is typically against those groups of people. But what boggles my mind is that people don't seem to understand. The collective does not define the injustice. The collective is used as a justification for the injustice, the individual instances of injustice. And the evidence of that is when these collectives are reversed, let's say. What happened to this mentally handicapped 18-year-old boy, white guy, is obviously horrific. I've watched the video. They used him as a human ashtray. It's unbelievably despicable. But it serves as the best representation that I could possibly imagine for this concept that I was trying to put forth months ago. Because what these people have done is they've identified him as a member of a collective, the collective white people. And they've deemed him somehow responsible for all the evils of white people, that he shares in that collective evil, therefore justifying their acts, their individual acts of injustice against and upon this person. But the point here is his mental capacity makes it such that he could not possibly, even if white people somehow shared in some common guilt, he's not capable of that because he's not capable of the reasoning. Even if he voiced some support for Donald Trump or even voiced some racial pride or something like that in his own ethnicity, which is a taboo if you happen to be a white person, he's not mentally capable of the reasoning it takes to make those kind of statements with full knowledge. So it is laid bare that these are horrific individual acts of injustice incorrectly perpetrated upon a person by identifying him as a member of a collective, in this case, a necessarily evil and malevolent collective, the collective white people, or Donald Trump supporters, etc., etc. And so I just want to say once again, I'm really rocked to watch this video. Because it's hard for me to fathom. My wife has said many times, I don't understand how someone could do that. And the point is, thank heavens you can't understand how someone could do that. Because if you could, you'd be capable of it yourself. It's pointless to try to understand how someone could perpetrate something like that. It's unbelievable. But it just serves for me to further cement this idea to me that we've got to step beyond this idea of collectivizing people and assuming that we can know someone by their arbitrary characteristics. The collectives don't exist. They're just used to justify individual instances of injustice. There's no such thing as group injustice. I mean, even if you were to take 100,000 people and march them into a gas chamber, you've still only instituted 100,000 individual instances of injustice. That's the only kind of injustice that exists. By collectivizing people in this way, these people and anyone like them, regardless of their own ethnicity and their own motives behind it, all they've done is serve to find a way to themselves internally justify these individual violent acts by deeming the people that they're perpetrating them against as somehow deserving. By having no other membership in a club than the very most arbitrary parts of them that would be identifiable as being a member of that group. It's heinous, and we'll never shed racism and tribalism and sexism and all of that until we rid ourselves of this concept. I'll finish by saying this. Collectives are concepts. They don't exist in the real world. Because of this, we can't collectivize things like human experience or attitudes and opinions. Sure, groups of people may share some common elements of human experience or common attitudes, but you can't guarantee, of course, that any given person within a collective necessarily shares that common experience or that common attitude within other members of the collective. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of prejudice, is assuming that you can know certain things about a person based on arbitrary characteristics. These collectives are often used to justify injustices perpetrated on individuals. Well, that person is just a so-and-so, or that person is just a such and such. The idea there being that it's a little more acceptable to perpetrate this injustice upon that person because as a collective, they've typically shared a better experience somehow. And that even maybe that same injustice perpetrated on another person of a more historically oppressed collective would be worse because of the historical oppression. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that these individual instances of injustice to the individual are just as heinous in their own right. And they need to be taken as seriously as though that were us. That's the point of empathy. I would not want that done to me. And so I would not dream of doing this to another. I've been watching the Netflix series Narcos, sort of binge watching. I hadn't heard of the series before a week ago or so. I'd heard of Pablo Escobar before, but I had not heard of the series, and I've been watching it, and I've been struck by watching that and also some documentaries about Pablo Escobar. I've been struck by how much terror and violence this guy perpetrated, and I'd been wondering, obviously before hearing about this 18-year-old mentally handicapped person's kidnapping, I'd been wondering about Pablo Escobar and people like him, what they would do if their ability to enact this kind of violence and terror were removed from their sort of toolbox, if they had to appeal to other people just based on reason and evidence, appealing to people's voluntary cooperation instead. And I have a feeling people like Pablo Escobar, his head might explode. I don't know, because he seems to be a very reactionary guy, and he needs to get his way in that way. But watching these documentaries and series about Pablo Escobar, and then watching people like these, anybody who would kidnap someone and torture them and enact these kind of violence against them, it seems very short-sighted. Because it's only by a matter of convenience that they're able to gain the kind of differential advantage that allows them to keep a person in that state of being beneath them, of being able to be terrorized in that way. But these situations can very easily turn around, and suddenly those people, whether it's a lack of empathy, whether it's a lack of foresight, or whether it's just a lack of damn IQ, when the tables are turned, they suddenly get very scared, and they whimper and they cower, as though they'd never contemplated that shift could possibly occur. I don't know what it is, but I do know that there are people who are guilty of fanning the flames of these faulty notions of collectives. I've got a collective. If we're going to have one, what about the collective human beings? Thanks for watching.